Hello. You probably don't know who I am. In fact, this is the first time that my voice is being used in one of my videos on this channel. I'm going by Tarek. Every video of Overwatch up to this point has been a brief clip. Something that I'd played and enjoyed. Something that I put up just because I had fun in the game. I want to take a moment here to, in a way, respond to the director's blog that came out earlier this week. Assuming, of course, that I get this up in time. The blog, or thesis as Aaron Keller put it, revolves around the debate between 5v5 and 6v6. This is a concept that's been plaguing the Overwatch community since the inception of Overwatch 2. I would like to address some of the things said. I'm not going to read through it. If you want to, I'll have it linked in the description, and there are plenty of other creators who have already read through the entire thing and talked about it on their own channels. I mean, Iman, Karq, J3, Spilo, any of the others. I believe the Group Up podcast just released their debate over it. I haven't listened to it yet. I won't be reading that here because I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you, and I want to talk to the developers about the game that I have played for, at this point, longer than any other game that I have played. First off, a little about myself. I was reminded by the lovely recap video that was sent out a few weeks ago of where I started my Overwatch journey and how long it had been. The year was 2016. I'd heard rumblings of a fantastic looking game whose cinematic trailers would make anyone want to try to be a hero. I'd watched with envy those others who I had seen online who were playing and talking about the game. When it came out, I was studying abroad. I was in another country and my laptop was barely able to play games. I had a simple wireless office mouse and no FPS experience, except a few tries at some free-to-play games that I was trying to fill the void that I thought was there because of Overwatch. I don't even remember the names of these games because they didn't leave an impact. Really, I had almost no PC gaming experience, having only played a little bit of Minecraft before that. Games were not really accepted in my home, and since I was paying my own way through college, I didn't really have money to throw at a game. But this game was different. It had a realm of possibility that I hadn't seen and was so intriguing to me that I had to buy it. I will never forget the first few games. I purchased the game on July 1st, 2016, and I remember that first time of going into the tutorial, getting to try Soldier 76 for the first time. I'll never forget calling one of the other students that was staying in the same house into the room where I was staying and watching him play Widowmaker for a moment, because he was considering buying the game as well. But I couldn't put it down. Since this was July, I didn't play a whole lot before the hero limit was instated. But I remember the initial chaos. The teams of 6 Mercies, for the fun of it, or 6 Tracers, just for the chaos. The Lucio shenanigans, and of course, plenty of Junkrat spam. I'll never forget learning for the first time that my own Diva Bomb would hurt me, or the massive team wipes that you could so easily get with her ult back then. See, I was one of those who ended up playing almost exclusively tank. Not really because I chose it at first, but because no one else played it, and there was usually a need for at least one. Now I went either support or tank almost every time, because there was no role queue at the time. That wouldn't come along until 2019. And that surprised me because I really thought it came earlier than that. But for that entire time, it was still very clear at even the low ranks that at least one of each role was needed in order for the game to work. My most played character was Diva, and she still is my most played character to this day. I got more comfortable with my aim and capability to pull off some crazy plays. Finally learned how to launch a Diva Bomb. But I'll never really got good at the game. In fact, for the entirety of Overwatch 1, I only left Bronze 5 for 1 or 2 seasons. Now again, I feel like it's important to say, this was my first FPS. It was one of the first PC games that I had ever played. I had very little understanding of aim and mechanics, but I still had fun. Since then, I've climbed some. I've finally gotten out of Bronze, but that doesn't really matter to this discussion, and I hope that you won't consider that too much in what I am about to say. What matters to this discussion is that I've seen every stage of the game mentioned by Mr. Keller in his post. So where are we? Since the beginning of Overwatch 2, there's been a great deal of difficulty in getting the game to feel balanced in any sense. There have been a few seasons, or half seasons, that have seemed fairly well balanced to the general community, but for the most part, especially in the state of tank, there are 1 or 2 that are the only ones that can really be played. I've heard a lot of claims that this isn't really felt at every level, that it's only up in top 500 that you really get to a point where you can't play whatever character you want to play. But that's not true. It reaches every level. I've tried to have a fairly well-rounded kit, but there have been several seasons where it didn't even feel like I could play tank, which is my most played role. Played enough D.Va that I know how to handle almost every tank matchup, but there's been seasons that didn't even feel like enough. So what do? As tank players, we resort to counterpicking. I wish this wasn't where it went. I wish I could say that I enjoy 5v5. But I'm not as optimistic as some of the others that have already talked about this issue. I play D.Va. I play a character that was designed and has always been played as an off-tank. She was made to play a style in Overwatch 2 that she was not designed for, and that she was not really upgraded to be able to handle. Now, with the Season 11 changes, I understand. She's pretty powerful right now. Her DM has become an immediate counter to Malga. Something that he can't even handle, really. And yes, she has her strengths. But even now, that depends on your entire team being able to survive so that you can do something. So that you can fight. So that you can move forward. So that you can go on a little bit of an off angle. So that you can do something besides standing on a choke with your DM. Sure, in the higher levels, the support's not enough to keep the teammates alive and let the D.Va play on off angles and dives. Sure, the DPS know enough to be on an off angle where they have cover. But I don't feel that in the low ranks. The consistency's not there. And again, remember the counter swapping? Counting bubbles doesn't help if your team never gets a pick. But I digress. I know the team understands the problems with only having a single tank. I know they've considered that and have decided that it's more important to decrease the queue times to make their DPS players happy. But what happens when you take the entire leadership of a team and cut that leadership in half? What happens when you go from 2 people being able to help each other to 1 standing alone? Yes, you could be hit, as Aaron said, by every cooldown in the game as a tank in Overwatch 1. And yes, you spent a bit of time walking back from spawn. But you would also know that if you had taken all those cooldowns, the other tank could still continue the fight. If the tank dies first in Overwatch 2, most of the time the team can't do anything. The fight is almost always lost, unless the other tank also falls at the same time. So explain to me how it's better to just lose the fight immediately if one of your members is bad. I play mostly tank, And it's the worst feeling ever when I can't do anything to help my team, just because the opposing tank or the opposing DPS are slightly better. The difference between having 1 and 2 tanks means that it's so much easier for the balance of the two teams to be off. I don't think that the ways that things are set now is terrible, but I do think that the game was designed and originally balanced to have 2 or more tanks working together. The design of certain heroes, especially those previously referred to as off-tanks, have not really transitioned well to working alone. D.Va does okay, Doom has some capability, and Ball's rework gives him the ability to rush in and out and even to help his teammates a little bit. But they're still inherently flawed when it comes to fighting alone. All of the off-tanks can be countered by a single Orisa javelin, sending a javelin their way. You can't fight that way. So with all that being said, I have a suggestion. It was said in the blog that a variety of formats would be attempted, and I appreciate the developers' attempts to play around and test. So I have a suggestion for one of these styles of formats. Make it possible to switch roles. But make it so that at least one of each role has to be picked at all times. This may be what they're already suggesting. There's an indication from Aaron's post that might be what they're planning. But with this system, maybe you would still queue for a certain role. But if you queue for more than one, you can be placed with a position of possibly flexing between the 2 roles. There needs to be more flexibility. Now, I cannot say that this wouldn't just almost always force a 2 tank, 1 DPS, 2 support, or 2 DPS, 1 support, as it's more likely. But it would allow for the more interesting gameplay without losing the ability to play for a tank. Now, tanks would probably need to have their survivability nerfed a bit in order to make this work, but I think it would be a much more interesting game. Anyway, that's the end of my rant. I love the game. I've always loved the game. Since it came out, I have wanted to play this game. And I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. But when the role that I chose to play, because of the lack of players in that role, is put in a position where I can no longer have any help to lead a team, to protect a team, it doesn't feel good anymore. Anyway, appreciate the thoughts. Any thoughts that you have, put them in the comments. I'm curious to see what you have to say.